Hey everyone, it's Joel Howe, and this is a tutorial on basic 3D using Adobe After Effects. In this tutorial, I want to cover basic use of 3D and cameras and 3D layers, and we'll do that creating a sky or a cloud fly through like this with some Photoshop elements as well. So we'll create our clouds in Photoshop, and then we'll bring them into After Effects to animate. And hopefully end up with something like this as the end result. So let's get started. Let me stop that and let's jump over to Photoshop. I have already built a series of different layers here. So you can take a look. I have Cloud 1 and Cloud 2, and I've basically created these using a set of Photoshop brushes that I downloaded, and the site that I downloaded them from is this link here, malanda.edu, and this site is run by Mila Vasilova, and she offers these Photoshop brushes up. And they are great for painting clouds into skies and backgrounds. So I encourage you to visit her website and download the brushes and give a donation to her so that she can buy some nice blue paint for. She also does paintings at this website, so take a look at those as well. And if you do end up using her brushes, definitely stop by and give her a donation and say thanks. But let me show you how the brushes work. Let's take Cloud 4 here. I'm going to select all and just delete that. And we'll start with the brush tool. And I already have the brushes loaded here. And you can see the last brush here is this. So you can see that's part of the collection. I don't think we need to show that here. But basically what you want to do is take any of these brushes and just click and one time to paint that brush, and at that point you could paint with two, but you'll see obvious repetition. So what I would do is just use a slightly different brush tool, and in this case it's much smaller, so what I'll do is I'll just increase the size a little bit, and so you can create more complex clouds just by painting a few simpler clouds like that. The features of this cloud are a little smaller, so maybe I'll expand that even a little bit more. And yeah, so that looks like a little better match. And then yeah, we just paint in as we need to. And that's kind of a streaky one, so I'm gonna choose a little different pattern here. And we'll expand that. I'm just going to increase the brush size a little bit. I do that with the square bracket button to decrease and increase the size. And so that looks good. And so a lot of times you can get away with painting twice if you combine it with another layer like that. So that match here and here isn't obvious in terms of pattern recognition. And so that's pretty much it. You can paint clouds, and it's a great set of brushes, and especially if you need to paint clouds in a certain form like a bunny rabbit or some other feature, some other recognizable shape, something you're not going to be able to photograph too easily. Okay, so I've got my different layers here, and I've got the background layer. Overall, I should note that in the canvas size here, my overall canvas size is 1080p essentially, and you could do this at double the resolution, at 4K resolution, and probably be better off in terms of showing detail. I do think some of the I think this size is fine if your final deliverable is 1080p. But if you are going to do 4K video, then obviously you might want to up the resolution. But the images tend to blur out, and when you're doing clouds, that's actually not a bad thing. Okay, last thing I'm going to do is just delete this layer. We don't need it for this, and I'll save our Photoshop file, and now we'll jump over to After Effects, and I'll say new project, and file import. So we're going to bring that Photoshop file in. Here it is. And as you bring the Photoshop file in, it's important, instead of just footage, which would bring it in as one, basically as a single raster image, bring it in as a composition, because what that's going to do is bring in all the layers separately. And so when we import that, we don't have any styles applied to each layer, so I don't think this matters for this composition. But if you had drop shadows or glows or other elements, you may want to break those out as separate layer styles. But in this case, it doesn't matter, so I'm just going to choose the default. And so what we get is the clouds.psd, the clouds Photoshop file, actually shows up as a composition. And so we can drag that down. Actually, we can just Actually, we can just double click that and open it. Because if I go to composition settings, because it was already 1920 by 1080, we have the right resolution here, and duration is 10 seconds, which is fine here. So, but you can set that to whatever length you need for your fly through. And I think we're all set actually. So we've got basically all these layers, and I'm gonna lock the background layer. But before I do, I just want to solo these layers so you can see the contrast in them. There's just some really nice contrast in these cloud layers. So so it's definitely something to appreciate as part of these brushes. And at this point, I'm going to lock down that background layer because it's basically filling the frame, and it's doing everything we want it to do. So now comes the 3D portion of After Effects. We have the 4 cloud layers here, but what we need to do is we need to make these cloud layers different depths in the scene. Everything is basically projected onto the same plane right now. And so I'm going to, what I'll do is just first create a new camera. So this is going to be a camera, and these camera settings are somewhat important. These are going to be based on my previous defaults, so yours may be different. So I chose a one-node camera, so that basically we're not looking at a target with the camera. We're actually any rotations we do to the camera will rotate the actual viewing angle of the camera. And then we also have a viewing angle, and right now it's set to 36 or 35 millimeter film size, so that's fine. I've turned on depth of field, so you can turn that on, and we can adjust the focus distance, which is going to change our viewing angle and field of view. And I've also dialed my aperture down to a pretty low level here, so I'm not going to have a very narrow depth of field. It's going to be a pretty wide depth of field. I think I had that at 5 or 6. And keeping this low keeps more of the clouds in focus at different depths. And the blur level is at 100%. So if you want to have a really narrow focus where, well, no need to get into that here, but you could leave this turned off if you wanted to, and then just experiment later with the different views. But for now, I'm going to keep everything the way it's set up here, and we'll say OK. So now I have a camera. Let me jump to 4 views so that you can see we've got our main view, which is the active camera, and in the top view here, there's our camera. And if I just twirl down the transform and we look at the position of the camera, I now have a camera is inherently a 3D object. So we have our X and our Y. So X value shifts in that direction. Our Y value shifts up and down in that direction. And our Z value shifts in that direction. So to push through clouds, all I'm going to do is animate that Z value. Okay? And so to do that, I'll start with something like this. Actually, that's fine, and I'll push this through. I'll scrub right over to 10 seconds, and I'll just increase that, and we'll see the motion. And so we can scrub through, and we can see that motion. Now, what you're not seeing is any movement of the clouds, because these clouds are basically 2D elements right now. They don't have any depth to them, and there's really no relation to them in the camera, except that they basically fill the view like any other 2D shapes. So what I need to do is actually select these objects, and I'm going to change the order here, just because I'm going to make my cloud order is going to start with cloud 1 being closest to me, and then cloud 2 being further away, and 3 being further away. So cloud 1 has to be on top because it's going to be my closest cloud. And but if I select all clouds 1 through 4, and if I choose the last switch here, which is a 3D layer, this allows manipulation in 3 dimensions. And so now these are 3D objects, and so now they're going to respond to the depth of the camera. And so we can see that. So now I've got that camera animation that had no effect on the 2D layers is now actually affecting the 3D layers in this composition, which is great. This is what we want. And so now all we have to really do is separate these and give them, basically space them out in that Z direction, in the direction of the camera movement. So with those 4 layers selected, I'm going to press P to bring up the position for each layer. And so if we take a look, now I don't want to select each one. 0 is going to be my closest cloud, let's say. So I've got 0 here, and that's fine. So now cloud 2, I want to move behind cloud 1. So if you take a look, you can actually see, as I scrub that through, negative values bring it closer to the camera, and positive values push it back. And so I'm going to push that back about 300, ballpark. And I'm going to take cloud 3 and space that back even more. That'll be about 600, somewhere in that range. And cloud 4 will go to 900. And so I'm basically just evenly spacing these out. And what that's doing, if I can show the camera here, is if I choose that camera, we can see the camera moving, and now we've got the layers all on different depths. And so all of a sudden we're starting to see a little shift and a little difference in the movement of the different clouds. So if I select all the clouds and I move them down, so we're flying over the clouds a little bit. So I just changed their Y value, their Y position. Now we get a situation where we're kind of flying over the clouds, and that looks pretty good. And so what you can see is we've got clouds in the front that are moving more than the clouds that are further back. So cloud 1 is the first cloud we're going to push through, and that impression that it's moving faster than the distant objects, the fact that these points in the nearer clouds are moving faster, that's parallax. So that's basically the visual effect that you want to achieve here. And so I think we're in good shape already, but I'd like to play with the camera movement to make sure that we kind of start immersed, because right now it's like we're flying into a cloud, and I might push this camera forward a little bit more already, and then that flies through, and I'd like to push it a little more at the end, so I'm at the last keyframe for the camera, and I can push that through so that some of the clouds get behind us as well. And I could actually animate the vertical value as well, so that it would feel like we're flying up. So we'd be moving both in the Z depth direction and vertically, which is fine. And so that looks pretty good. And so that's it. At this point, we've done the hard work of creating those cloud layers and basically animating them. It's a pretty simple animation, because really the only thing that's moving right now is the idea of the camera itself. And so what I'd like to do is, let's do this. I want to add, I'm going to just double the amount of clouds, and I'm going to push these even further back so that as we get to the end, it doesn't feel like there's nothing in the distance. And so let me do that. I'm going to select those 4 cloud layers, Control D to duplicate it, and again, I want to keep this a little bit in terms of the cloud numbering so that my cloud 1 is closest and 5, 6, 7, and 8 are in the back. So this is fine. And if I bring up the positions here, you can see that we basically start with these values. And so I really need to kind of look at these and say, okay, this is going to be 10 or 1200, this is going to be 1500, and this is going to be 1800, something like that, and then 2100. And you can see the clouds pushing back, and you can actually do this in the top view as much as any other view. And the nice thing about this now is that I can take some of these more distant clouds that are really far away and start to play with their images. And it also matters where they are at different times. So the camera moving means that a cloud's location up front is going to be different, and so you have to check the values along the way. So you'll be doing a lot of scrubbing back and forth, and then but having those clouds fill in the area that's off the screen just makes the whole sky feel fuller. So I might take this cloud and I'll push it way over there, and so that we've got this. There we go. And so at this point, I could, another thing that may happen, and I don't see any good examples of it right now, but since these clouds are basically duplicates of the same layer, sometimes you might have a situation where you see the exact same pattern. And so in this case here, there's a pattern of this leg this loop sticking out here is this here. You know, if we bring it over, you can see that they're basically just scaled a little differently. And it's not even the scale, it's the change in the position. But what you can do is to kind of mask that, or make sure that that's not going to happen, is, or try to avoid it, is if I press the S key to just bring up the scale for cloud 6, I'm going to turn off the constrained proportions and just set the X scale to -100, and that just flips it. So now if you look, you've got the same feature that's there, but it's harder to spot the pattern if you're watching because it's basically inverted. And so you can do that with the scale for any of these, and it works out pretty well. All right, so I think this looks pretty good. Now the only thing I don't like is that we have these layers, and the cloud layers are turning into kind of a big white mess here. They're just white after white, and so we can't see any real depth or shifting here because everything is just white. And so now I think I'm going to solve that with a, let's see, I think I'm done for now here. So I'll just take cloud 1, and I'll just do a simple under generate, under perspective, drop shadow. Perspective, drop shadow, radial shadow. Let's do a radial shadow. And so automatically you get a kind of a black shadow there, and that works fine. You can change the opacity here so we can get a little depth in it, and the projection distance can actually go down towards 0, and so softness we can adjust as well. And all this is going to do is just give us a little relief here. And I actually choose the background color as the shadow color, and that seems to work pretty well. You know, you can fill that in if you want to, but I think that works to just give it enough distance so that we can start to see those shapes moving faster than the other clouds around them. And so that works pretty well. We've got the radial shadow. And again, projection distance is 0, and the light source is something that you could We could animate, but because the distance is 0, it doesn't really matter. And so what I'm going to do is just copy that. I'm going to select that radial shadow effect, and I'm going to choose my other 8 layers, and I'm going to paste. And so they all get the radial shadow effect. And I think the end result is a lot better in terms of we get the depth that we want. And if I just select all and press U, basically it hides all of the features, and we can kind of see all the layers there. And it just separates everything to a significant extent. And we get a much more readable motion separation of the layers. It still feels like a cloudy mass, but it's but the layers are distinguishable. So I think it's a definite improvement with that radial shadow, especially because you can adjust that or even animate it if you wanted to. And again, at this point we've got pretty good motion here. So I think we are in good shape. Let's see. Next up, I should let's just take clouds 5, 6, 7, and 8, and let's just duplicate those. And I just want to add those just to show we can just drag these straight up. And because we never really see the bottoms of the clouds here, it actually allows us to kind of move those up. And again, it kind of fills in our space a little bit here and shows a more detailed sky environment. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with all of the clouds and the camera movement, and the sky looks fine in the background. So let's add our sun. And to do that, I'm going to actually, I don't need all 4 views up anymore. So I'll go back to my one view and just show as much of that as we can. And at this point, I'm going to make a new, you know what, I'm going to do a brand new composition. I'm going to call this the sun, and it's fine to be, and I'm just going to make this 2000 by, actually we can just make this the same 1920 by 1080. This doesn't have to be any bigger. And this way we can, if we have to do any compositing or experimentation, we can do it right here in the sun composition. And it's really pretty much just a shape layer. And I'm going to just use the ellipse tool and just draw a shape. And I think I'll apply a blur to that, either a fast blur or a Gaussian blur, and just a 10, 20, 15 pixel blur. So at this point, it's a pretty boring sun, or at this point, but it will, if we go back to our clouds layer and we drag the sun in, that can go behind the clouds. And at this point, we can toggle back to our blending modes, and we can see that we could do an add or a screen. If I bring this to the very front, you can see it's right there. And as the clouds reveal, they'll reveal more of the sun, and that's okay. That's actually probably pretty good. And of course we could adjust the position of the clouds so you get a full reveal of the sun. But basically, the only thing we need for the sun, and I'm going to put it behind all the clouds again, is you could use, there's a couple of effects you can consider. If you have the Trapcode Shine has a couple of presets that are really good. So if you have your center in front of the sun, you could use like you could boost the ray length of that and get some effects. Choose I think there's a preset in here called Heaven, and you could adjust that effect, and basically play with different effects and different lighting sequences. But I know that not everybody has that, so if you're going to use any of the After Effects defaults, I would use under Generate, I'd use the Light Burst, CC Light Burst 2.5. And again, what you want to do is get the center on your sun. So I would basically just solo that and put the center there. And then boost your ray length up. And that's going to give you some nice sun there. Now, one thing that happens is if you go too high with the ray length, it actually collapses. So you gotta don't go too high, or else it kind of seems to invert on itself. One of the things that can happen here is you may see some banding. I don't know if you'll be able to see it in the compression of the video, but if you go from 8-bit to 16-bit, that should solve a lot of the issue in terms of the banding. And so now I've got a fairly nice sun glow happening, and overall the effect is looking pretty good. Now we can move that around, is basically just by moving that sun location in our sun composition. And the only thing we have to do is make sure that our light burst center actually stays with the sun. So I put it there. Oops. Let's just pick that. Okay. So it looks like you have to really be careful about ray lengths over 200 because the light burst 2.5 seems to disappear at that point. So I would keep it in keep it under 200.5. That's an interesting little tidbit. But now we've got a sun, and we've got it in the clouds, and so we've got it working pretty well. The only thing I would add at this point would be I might duplicate this. So Control D, and just put this in front of the clouds as well. And probably just do a little much lower transparency here, just to kind of wash out some of the clouds that are directly in front of the sun. It's a more subtle effect, but I think it'll help sell the idea of the clouds being washed out as they pass in front of the sun. And at this point, the only other thing you might do is your classic lens flare. So if I were to add a new solid layer, just solid black layer, and I would set that to an add or a screen blending mode. Let me set it to normal first so that you can see the effect. And that is just under stylize, or actually no, generate lens flare. And so you can decide which one you want to use. But when we change the lens flare layer, the black solid layer, to add or screen, now we're basically adding more to this. So you could animate the lens flare over time as you're moving through the clouds, and change that. So if you wanted to, just at the beginning you have your flare center, and then scrub to a different point in time, and we can change that flare center and have that follow the clouds, or just shift slightly, and you get the idea. And so that's about it. I think the only other thing I can think to do with this that I haven't is maybe Cloud 1 is the closest layer. Cloud 2 kind of gets in our face here a little bit. So Cloud 2 would be this cloud. And so it has this these elements here. And so what I might do for Cloud 2 is animate the opacity as it gets close, so it feels like we're passing through that. And so that would really just be choosing Cloud 2, press T for opacity, and then I would just set a keyframe for that at 100%, and then fade it out to 0 at some point later in time. And the other thing you might want to do there is, while you're fading it, is also blur. And in this case, I'll just do a fast blur and set that at 0. And then do a 10 or 20 pixel fade if you wanted to. And so then it's going to fade out as it blurs. And hopefully that will give us an effect of we're passing through that cloud as long as the motion keeps happening. And that's about it. So we've got some good motion in the camera. We've got our all of our clouds. We've added a sun and a lens flare. We painted our clouds in Photoshop, and we used a 3D camera movement and 3D positioning of the layers to have a pretty visually impressive sky or clouds fly through. So I hope you liked the tutorial. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.